Hello and welcome to Spread Book Joy. In this Get Kids Reading series, I give you all the information that I find invaluable as a teacher when I'm looking for high quality but engaging books for children. Save yourself hours of reading and research time by watching one video. To make life even easier, I've put timestamps in the description below so you can skip to the most relevant parts of the video. Today's video is all about the popular bestseller Wonder by RJ Palacio. I've chosen to do a video on Wonder because I've got quite a long history with this book and I know it very well. I personally really enjoy reading it and I've read it many times. About 2013-2014 I started up a book club for children in my school, and they were aged 9 to 10 or 10 to 11. And I would always start off with a book that I wanted to hook them in with, and I found Wonder at that time and read it myself and thought, this is definitely that book. It's going to hook all the children in, no matter what their level of interest is, because I felt it was it's a contemporary school story to start with, and children, I think when you're not quite sure whether they like fantasy or mystery or any of those types of, if you're not sure about the genres that they like, always go for something contemporary that they can relate to. School stories, I think, are particularly evocative for children, and they can relate, and regardless of whether they're into mysteries or horror or fantasy or none of those things, all of the children can relate to a school story. So I found Wonder, and at the time there wasn't a film out, and this is quite key to why it was so enjoyable to do it with my children's book clubs back then. It was a real surprise to them. None of the children I introduced the book to had ever read it or seen or heard of it, and now, because it's like a publishing phenomenon, I mean, it's an absolute juggernaut of a book. It's sold millions of copies, and the film starred Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson and a little boy called Jacob Tremblay, who's amazing as the main character, August Pullman, and it even won an Oscar for makeup. I mean, it really lives up to the hype. This is a great book, and if you haven't read it yet, no matter what your age, I think you'll enjoy it, so pick up a copy and read it. It's really great. But I never had one child who didn't love it, and that was prior to them all knowing about it, and then afterwards when I'd introduce the book and they'd go, oh yes, I've seen that film, I love it, and then they'd want to read the book. Whilst it was really great years ago doing it when it hadn't been a big major film and no one had heard of it, and it was a lovely thing to introduce like a brand new thing that they'd never heard of, it still really excites the children when they see you bring out a copy of it, because if they have seen the film, they're really interested in the book. If they haven't seen the film, even better, the book will come as much more of a surprise. So first of all, I'm going to look at the edition that I've got here. The edition is $7.99, and it doesn't tell you much about the book on the back. It just says, my name is August. I won't describe what I look like. Whatever you're thinking, it's probably worse. The edition I've got is just the standard paperback, but the one that I bought years ago, which I don't have anymore, had an additional chapter in. It was called the Julian chapter. This book is told from lots of different points of view, which I'll talk about in a moment, but there are little different novellas from different characters' perspectives that were written after this book, and they're a collection of, I think it's called Oggy and Me, and that's an ebook you can get. It's a lovely book, and it seems like a quite dense text, and it's 300 pages. It's about 300 pages. But what I would say, whilst it's dense text, the chapters are very short. That's the size of one of them on page 99 there. It's literally a paragraph. It's a couple of paragraphs, I should say. It's like half a page. And it's wonderful. I've also listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook is read by 3 different people, Kate Rudd, Nick Podell and Diana Steele. I listened to it on Audible, and brilliant audiobook, really good, very entertaining, and I just think, yeah, it brings the book to life. So if you like audiobooks, I can recommend the audiobook as well. The author, RJ Palacio, is a New York-based author, and she's of Colombian heritage. She's got an excellent website, and she's got a design background, and she used to design book covers apparently. So when I looked up a little bit about her to find out a bit more, Wonder was her debut novel, and she's since followed it up with a number of little novellas, which I've talked about already, but they're linked to the main story, but they're about peripheral characters who don't have a voice in the book, which is really fitting because the narrative structure of the book is told from several different points of view, several different points of view, which I'll get to a bit later. And the website's fantastic, and there's lots of fantastic resources to use on there. There are tons of resources on Wonder. There are plans, there are schemes of work. There are really nice videos and things that you can look at with the children ahead of reading the book. Before the film was available, there was a really lovely book trailer, I guess you call it. The publishers, I don't know if the publishers put it together or someone else put it together, and that's nice to watch before reading the book. The author's got lovely interviews online as well, where she explains where her inspiration from the book came from. Wonder is all about August Pullman, who is a 10-year-old boy who is born with Treacher-Collins syndrome, and apparently that is a rare disorder. It occurs in 1 in 50,000 births, and it affects the development of bones and other facial tissues, which means that actually he has a lot of facial differences and respiratory problems and hearing loss. So he has never been to school before because he spent a lot of his life going to hospital and having various surgeries, and he's been homeschooled by his parents. As a character, he's really smart and funny. He's very observant. He's spent his whole life with a lot of pain and a lot of difficulty, but he's been surrounded by love. He's got a really loving, fiercely protective mother and father. And when we meet August in the very first chapter, his initial chapter is pretty heartbreaking actually, and he's the first narrator of the first part of the book. So each book is labelled part 1 and the name of the character, part 2 the name of the next character, and there are quotes from songs, usually lyrics. And the opening lyric for part 1, August, it says, "Fate smiled and destiny laughed as she came to my cradle," and it's by someone called Natalie Merchant, and the song is called Wonder. And when I looked it up, Natalie Merchant's a singer-songwriter who wrote this song called Wonder because she had a lot of experience working with special needs children, and the odds that seem insurmountable that they managed to overcome in their lives. If you Google it, you can hear it online, and there's a little explanation for why she wrote the song. So that's the initial quote to start with, and then we get into the very first page, the very first chapter, which is headed Ordinary. That's the chapter heading, and it's 1 page and it's heartbreaking. Let me read it to you a little bit just so you get a snapshot. "I know I'm not an ordinary 10-year-old kid. I mean, sure, I do ordinary things. I eat ice cream, I ride my bike, I play ball, I have an Xbox. Stuff like that makes me ordinary, I guess, and I feel ordinary inside. But I know ordinary kids don't make other ordinary kids run away screaming in playgrounds. I know ordinary kids don't get stared at wherever they go. If I found a magic lamp and I could have one wish, I would wish that I had a normal face that no one ever noticed at all. I would wish that I could walk down the street without people seeing me and then doing that look away thing. Here's what I think. The only reason I'm not ordinary is that no one else sees me that way. But I'm kind of used to how I look by now. I know how to pretend I don't see the faces people make. We've all gotten pretty good at that sort of thing. Me, Mum and Dad and Via. Actually, I take that back. Via's not so good at it. She can get really annoyed when people do something rude. Like, for instance, one time in the playground, some older kids made some noises. I don't even know what the noises were exactly because I didn't hear them myself, but Via heard and she just started yelling at these kids. That's the way she is, but I'm not that way. Via doesn't see me as ordinary. She says she does, but if I were ordinary, she wouldn't feel like she needs to protect me as much. And Mum and Dad don't see me as ordinary either. They see me as extraordinary. I think I'm the only person in the world who realises how ordinary I am is me. My name is August, by the way. I won't describe what I look like. Whatever you're thinking, it's probably worse." I mean, what an opening to a book. I think it hooks you straight in. You've got all these questions. He sounds smart and sensible, and he sounds really together, and he's very observant. Listen to the way he's talking about his family. And Via, who we can talk about with the children, will assume is his sister, and it turns out she is his sister. And why is she getting angry? And when he says he's the only one who thinks like he feels he's ordinary, what does he mean he feels ordinary when everyone else sees him as not ordinary? It's all these discussions to have. But his parents think he's extraordinary, and obviously that's spelt extraordinary. Children always like to read it a little bit like that to start with. But what does that tell you about his parents and his relationship to his family? So it's a really good opening, really hooks you in, loads of questions. Then the next chapter, I won't go through chapter by chapter, but I just need to tell you how good the opening of this book is, why I didn't go to school, and talks about his condition and his operations and why his mum homeschooled him, and then how I came to life, chapter 3. Very, very funny. And reading those first few chapters with children, they are straight away mesmerised, they're hooked in. It's a conversational story, it's really down to earth the way it's read, and it's funny. There's some tragic parts in it which adults will get and older children will empathise. When they hear it, they always feel sorry for why would people treat someone like that? Why would people run away from another child? And it's an excellent book for getting them to reflect on how they might feel towards someone who looked different, or how they might behave. It's a really wonderful book. So the start of it's really funny. We learn about August, and he's going to school, and he's going to go to private school. His parents are quite privileged, they live in New York. And to start with, he's taken to the school for a walk round ahead of starting there, because his school's very aware that he's different, that he's never been to school before. And it's a middle school, which I'm assuming is, well, like middle school in the UK before you go into secondary or high school. And he's going to join 5th grade, which in the UK is year 6, so he's 10 going on 11. And he's asked to come into school to be shown around the school by some of his classmates, and they're brought in to help him look around. And he meets these 3 classmates, Julian and Jack and a girl, I can't remember her name. They're showing him around, and whilst they're showing him around, Julian comes across as actually he's really dislikable, and he's really unpleasant towards Oggy, and this is a really good discussion to have with kids. August thinks to himself he's not actually a nice kid. He's one of those kids who pretends to be nice in front of adults but actually isn't, and that always brings up really good discussion with the children. Well, how does he know he's a bully? Like, Julian hasn't actually come out and bullied him, but why do we know? Why is he behaving so unpleasantly? Why do we take a dislike to Julian, and why does August feel uncomfortable around him? The other boy, Jack, seems a lot more pleasant, and as the story goes on, August starts 5th grade, and as predicted, Julian is a bully. He's really unpleasant to August. Jack, on the other hand, is very cool. He's a really nice kid, and August and him make friends, and they laugh together, and they find everything hilarious, and everything's wonderful. But as the story goes on, the first part of the story, the first few, I think 80 pages or so, maybe more, is told from August's point of view, and the second part is told from his sister's point of view. But in the first part, what happens to August is he starts school, Julian turns out to be a bully as predicted, Jack turns out to be a wonderful friend, and he also meets another friend, a girl called Summer, who's my favourite character in the whole thing. And these are children who, despite the way he looks, other children are really, they're initially shocked when they see him, they don't know how to react, some of them are scared of him, and August takes a lot of it in his stride because he's used to it. It's the way he's lived, and he's used to people staring and things like that. But some of it's really hurtful, and in particular what happens, Jack, who he befriends for quite some time, there's Halloween comes up, and Halloween is August's favourite holiday because he gets to wear a mask and a costume and a helmet, and no one stares at him and no one bothers him, and he loves it. So he says he's going to dress up as his favourite character from Star Wars, because he has a Star Wars obsession, which is quite important throughout the book. And he says he's going to dress up as one of his favourite characters, I think it's Boba Fett. But on the last minute he changes his mind and decides to wear a Scream costume. So when he comes into class, everyone's expecting him to be Boba Fett. He comes in wearing this completely different costume, no one recognises him, and he sits down and hears this discussion between Jack and Julian and these other boys. And Julian is wearing a mask of a character called Darth Sidious from the Star Wars films, who has quite a melted face, and he's doing it because he thinks that's what August looks like. He's really cruel, and he's saying to the other children, look, yeah, they're saying, oh yeah, it really does look like him. And one of them said, you know, actually, I think if I looked like him, I'd kill myself. And the shocking part about it is the person who says it is Jack, who has been his best friend all the way through. And then he says, Julian says to Jack, well, why do you hang around with him so much? He went, I don't know, I don't even want to hang around with him. You know, we were asked to show him around the school and he's kind of latched onto me. And the heartbreak you feel when this happens, it's just devastating. So August runs out of the classroom, he goes to the office, he says he's feeling sick, he gets him to call his mum picks him up, he's sick, he's crying, he doesn't tell them why, and he has a braid in his hair which is Padawan braid, which if you're a Star Wars fan is what the young Jedis have before they become full Jedis, and he has one and he cuts that off, and it's really symbolic because he grew that with his old friends who've moved up and who've moved away and gone off elsewhere, and he's had it for a long time. So then we move on to part 2 of the book and his sister Via's point of view, and Via is furious that he's cut off his Padawan braid, and this is another discussion to have. What does it symbolise? What does it mean? Why is Via so angry about him cutting that off? Why is she so protective and so angry about it? But Via, up until now, she's been this kind of satellite character, she's been the background character to August, and she becomes actually just as important throughout the book. The book's as much about her as it is about August, and she started high school and she's come back from her summer holidays to discover that she started high school, and her 2 best friends, who are quite bookish and quiet like her, one of them has come back from camp and she's completely changed. She's changed her hair colour, she's changed her outfits, she's hanging out with these cool kids, she's got a boyfriend. Via's being cut out of their lives and she's really struggling with it. She's struggling with starting high school. When we go to part 2, the quote in it for Via is, "Far above the world, planet Earth is blue and there's nothing I can do," which is from Space Oddity by David Bowie. And the reason that starts with that is because her first chapter is headed A Tour of the Galaxy, and the very opening of it says, "August is the sun. Me and Mum and Dad are planets orbiting the sun." So Via has spent her life, and she loves August, don't get me wrong, but she spent her life in the shadow of August and everything that goes about with him, his surgeries and all the worrying his parents have to do about him. But she accepted it for a long, long time, but I think she's struggling now because she's now at high school and she's never asked parents for help with homework, she's never asked them to come to anything to do with her, and now she starts to act out at home and become the typical moody teenager. But that generally, this whole idea of the typical moody teenager, I mean, yes, hormones etc play a huge part in it, and growing up is tough, but there's always something going on, and whether it's something they want to share with you or can share with you, I think it's naive to just assume that it's just hormones when the teenager starts acting out. And she's definitely got some serious issues with friendship and things going on. She starts to avoid her friends, or they're not her friends anymore, but her mum and her family still think that they're all very close because as children they played together, so the parents know each other and they get each other to pick their kids up from school, but she doesn't want to sit in the same car with this old friend, so she's avoiding her. And then she meets a boy and she gets a boyfriend, and one of the chapters ends up being from his perspective. But anyway, the story goes on. You know, August has to find his way back to being friends again with Jack. Jack gets a chapter, we see his perspective and his point of view, and he's at this privileged private school, but actually he's there because he's got a scholarship of some reason. He's actually not a privileged rich kid, and he's a really lovely kid, and we actually get to see a lot behind why he's behaved in that way towards August, and it all turns out fine in the end. I don't want to do any more spoilers beyond that and go into it too much, but you can see how special this book is. It's different perspectives of different characters told really well, and each character really does sound unique. You know, they don't sound like carbon copies of each other, and they sound well-rounded and believable. The other character that gets a point of view in the book is a girl called Summer, and I've just said she's my absolute favourite character. She is really cool. She's the only person who wants to sit next to August in the canteen, and after Jack and August fall out, and Jack's trying to find out why August doesn't want to be friends with him anymore, and he can't figure it out because of course he doesn't know August overheard him talking about him. Summer is the person who is the linchpin in getting them back together as friends, and she stays August's friend, and she's really sweet, she's really cool. She doesn't care what other people think about her hanging around with him. She gets a chapter of her own as well. But there's a character called Mr. Brown, the English teacher, and throughout the book he starts off by saying he has a monthly precept, so kind of like a moral, and these precepts are scattered throughout the book, and they're wonderful to talk to children about. And there's an appendix at the back of the book with them all in. They're all quotations, and the first one, which is the main theme of this whole book, is when given the choice between being right or being kind, choose kind. Choose Kind has become a movement. There's hashtag Choose Kind, and it started by readers of the book. You can find online that RJ Palacio started it, but actually she doesn't cash in on it or anything like that. It's just something that started by fans of the book, and the idea of choosing kindness is the central theme, that if the whole world would be better if people chose to be kind. So that's one of the themes, but there are loads more, of course. Sibling relationships, how these are affected by parents and how parents relate to their children differently. Friendships, how they're formed, how they change, especially in Via's story. That's really powerful, especially if you're doing it as a year 6 book for children going into secondary school and transition, and talking about how friendships grow and change and people change, moving through these big transitions in life. But there's also bullying, of course, and fear of difference and how it feels to be different. The concept of beauty and whether looks are important, empathy, bravery, moral outrage and judgment. All of these things are big themes within the book, and this is why it's such a powerful book to do. In terms of what you would do with it, it's a fantastic storybook. You can use it for lots and lots of different subjects. It's a really good stimulus for discussion and for teaching really important life lessons. And I don't think I've come away from it without children really having such awareness of how they view others and how that affects other people, even if you can't see that it's affected that person, and how important it is to be kind, really, which is the best and most important message you can give them, I think. One of the best resources I found online is a blog by Mr. W. Reads, which is, I think it's an American teacher, and he's created a series of Wonder Read Aloud resources. So while he was reading the book aloud with his children, they got these pages together which list lyrics and songs and the different quotes and all the different references in the book, because they refer to Star Wars and films and books, all sorts of things, and he's put together this amazing resource. So if you go to sort of the first page, part 1, August, it will bring you to a video of Natalie Merchant's Wonder and then a copy of the lyrics, and you can read that through. And then if you go on to the next one, you've got David Bowie's Space Oddity. It's not necessary for the reading of the book, it just enhances and enriches that reading so much more. And I wish I'd found this resource back when I did my last book club with the children, because it's just something extra. It's just this extra bit of loveliness to add to the reading. Another really good resource is Puffin. Publishers have produced a resource pack for teachers for Key Stage 2. Excellent, full of really good ideas and questions and activities linked to all areas of the curriculum. If you want to look at paid things, Twinkle, if school's got a subscription to Twinkle, they've got resources on Wonder, lots of lesson plans. There's a Scholastic series of books which are really good called Read and Respond, and they have a Wonder edition as well. Plus, you go onto TES, there are tons and tons of schemes of work on there, some paid, some free. There's no point in me sifting through all of it for you, but I would definitely recommend looking at the Puffin Schools resources and the Mr. W Reads, which is great. I'll put the links below in the description box. But in terms of activities I've done and things that I've really, and some ideas I've had going forward for things I'd like to do, particularly writing, I'd love to do a bit more work on points of view and examine how RJ Palacio creates those unique voices for each of her characters, and then maybe turning a scene from the book into a third person narration to explore showing and not telling. So how do we know all of these characters, because we've got their internal monologue going on in the actual book, but if you turn it into a third person narration and you've got a limited viewpoint of what's going on, then how do we show these emotions and show these characters' feelings and motivations without telling? There's a book trailer online which you can watch to start off your unit of work or your story time, whatever it is, to get the children hooked into it. Though honestly, that first opening chapter hooks children, I'm telling you now, it really does. And then after you've read it, there's a lovely interview with RJ Palacio, which I'll link to below, where she explains her inspiration for writing the book. Please let me know if you've used this book in class and how it went, and any ideas you have, any further recommendations. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe and recommend it to anyone who might find it useful. But most importantly, please do spread some book joy of your own wherever you can. Bye!